Hola muchachos, ¿qué tal? Esperen que se encuentren bien. And all that stuff. Okay, hello. New week, new chapter of Heroes. Let's get crack. Ooh, that seems very loud actually. Just looking at my little monitor down there. I've taught my dad how to use Skype, but his hearing isn't very good. And so I'd link this up so that I can turn the volume up massively. So there you go. I hope that's better for you. If not, please tell me that I'm making your eardrums burst and I'll try to respond to it just very quickly on the point of responding to things. I'm a bit thick. Surprise, surprise. There were a few comments last time which I didn't see, and at first I thought it was just this thing I've sometimes had where the comments don't seem to come up till later. I realised afterwards I think I just wasn't looking. I didn't pull the comments slide down, so I'll make sure I do now. Okay? Okay. Heroes then. Let's get moving. So Heroes, that ending, of course, we had the loss of innocence, which is both the loss of innocence of America, that feels like it's safe. Damon, what microphone have I got? This guy. It's a Niwa. I've got a few things from the football club, and I just grabbed this one as well. I'll stick the details down if you want, but I've also got. I'll show you my setup. Should I show you my setup? This is my room of broadcasting and mess. Don't tell my wife. She's not allowed to come in, obviously, because it's a hideous mess. Microphone, and then I've got a mixer desk. Is that on a mixer there? And the mixer is an old mixer from when from doing the football. We don't use it anymore, but it's very good. So it's I can control the audio quite well through that. So it's a residue of football commentaries, Damon, but it certainly does the job, I think. Okay, get them. What the hell? Got loads of rubbish on the desk here. There, done. And Damon, have a look in the comments last time as well, because we have thingamajig. Ipsam Watsa. What the hell am I talking about? Yeah, I answered your question about where the place got bombed in the last stream. Sorry, getting confused now. Dylan knows what he's talking about. Oh, the more filters, the better, as far as I'm concerned, Dylan. Keeps me away from you guys. Means I can't catch anything. Sorry, no offense. Okay, let's get back to the book, shall we? We had this loss of innocence of America. America being bombed, Pearl Harbor. That was a shock. America felt safe, and that no matter what happened in the world, they wouldn't be bothered. And then they also had the They also had the. Oh, my mind's really good this morning, isn't it? The comparable thing with Francis and Nicole. Everything seems perfect. Francis is the table tennis champion. Nicole does the performance, the dancing, and then just when they think it's wonderful having their party afterwards, Pearl Harbor happens. They lose that innocence, and so now the town changes, becomes different. And we know that Larry has gone off, volunteered to go to the army, and has become a hero, won the Silver Star. But there was again one of those little sentences at the end to make you wonder what's coming next. Remember the last thing we read, closing my eyes, I think of Nicole and how his first homecoming during the war changed our lives forever. So, okay, what happens when Larry comes back? So we're going to find that out now. Just a pernickety point of pronunciation. The first word I'm going to say is an army rank. I think I'll say it the British way. Lieutenant. Doesn't look like it says lieutenant, but that's the British way of pronouncing it. In America, lieutenant. Okay, so in Britain we say lieutenant. Anyway, Lieutenant Lawrence LaSalle, U.S. Marine Corps, holder of the Silver Star for acts of heroism in the steaming jungles of Guadalcanal in South Pacific, hero of newsreels and radio broadcasts, was coming home on furlough. He was scheduled to arrive on the 3:10 p.m. train from Boston on July the 3rd, 1943. On that hot and humid afternoon, a crowd gathered at the Monument Depot to greet his arrival, including kids from the rec centre, Joey LeBlanc, Louis Arabelle, Marie Lacroix, and me among them. And parents who knew that Larry LaSalle had been a bright Pied Piper for their children in the bleakness of the Depression. Pied Piper's an interesting comparison. I might come back to that later. Have a think of what Pied Piper does. I look towards Monument Park, impatient for Nicole to join us. As a volunteer now with the Monument Red Cross, she was preparing food kits for servicemen that day and said she'd join us in time for Larry LaSalle's arrival. I placed a foot on the rail, hoping to feel the slight trembling that would announce the train's approach. The heat of the rail burned through the sole of my shoe. Turning, I saw Nicole coming into view through the haze of heat. She wore a dark blue skirt and a white blouse. She waved to me as she hurried through toward the depot. At the same time, the chug of engine, blast of horn, and hiss of steam announced the arrival of the train from Boston. A moment later, Larry LaSalle stood on the platform, resplendent in the green uniform with the lieutenant's bars on his shoulders and the ribbons and medals on his chest. He smiled, the old movie star smile, skin tanned and glowing, small wrinkles around his eyes as he squinted down at us. We cheered as he stepped down from the platform and walked towards our group. That touch of Fred Astaire still in his walk, but something different about him. His slenderness was knife-like now, lethal, his features sharper, nose and cheekbones. I remembered how hard it had been to think of him as a fighting Marine when he announced his enlistment, but seeing his lean, hard body now, I could picture him storming a hillside on Guadalcanal, rifle in hand, bayonet fix, grenades dangling from his belt, pumping bullets into the enemy. Then he was among us. We surrounded him, crowding him, embracing him, getting as close to him as possible. "My hero from the war," Joey LeBlanc called out, clowning of course, but saying what we all thought. Larry was our war hero, yes, but he'd been a hero to us long before he went to war. It's a classic again, cliched, heroic image, isn't it? Steps off the train, the crowd's all there to greet him and tell him how wonderful he is. He drew away, holding us off at arm's length, stepping back. "The better to see you," he said, looking at each of us in turn. When his eyes fell on me, I made a gesture, as if serving the small white ball over the net, and he swiveled his arm as if returning the ball. His eyes moved to Nicole, and I saw the rush of affection on his face. Nicole bowed, tilting her head like a ballet dancer, and he dipped his head in return, his eyes full of her. A blush turned her cheeks crimson and only added to her beauty. Mayor Harold Burnham arrived in a big black car, followed by city officials, most of whom walked a short distance from City Hall. Car horns blew and more cheers rose in the afternoon heat as the mayor vigorously shook Larry LaSalle's hand, embraced him fiercely, and presented him with a silver key to the city. "You are our celebration," the mayor declared in his best mayor voice, referring to the fact that the holidays were observed quietly during the war years. No bonfires or fireworks, and no parades. "Your presence in this great city of ours, Lieutenant Lawrence LaSalle, is cause enough for jubilation." Other officials made speeches and the words sailed over our heads meaninglessly, while Larry LaSalle stood modestly before the crowd, eyes lowered. Finally, a stillness fell, and he turned to the gathering. "Thank you," he said. He spoke of the men and women serving in all parts of the globe, who were defending freedom, and how some of them would give their lives willingly and courageously. He paused and looked down at us, his kids from the rec centre. "I'm glad to be home, if it's only for a little while. And most of all, I want to be with the rec centre gang." Once again, he'd made us feel special, singling us out from the townspeople who gathered there. Nicole squeezed my hand, and my eyes grew moist. She squeezed him a bit hard then. Sorry. He's wonderful, isn't he? He's their hero. Comes back and makes them the centre of everything. We have to keep the world safe for these young people. They are our future. A celebration went on during the afternoon and evening, culminating in a welcome home dance that night at City Hall. The hall was a bright spot in the dark wartime city. Streetlights dim, air raid wardens patrolling the peak of Moosic Hill on the lookout for enemy planes, although an air attack on Monument was a remote possibility. But better be vigilant than sorry. said an editorial in the Monument Times. German U-boats had been sighted in the waters off the Massachusetts shore, and rumours claimed that Nazis prowled the streets of New England in disguise. But City Hall blazed with lights behind the blackout curtains, and the big orchestra played the tunes of the day while the dancers twirled on the floor. We were a merry group, Larry LaSalle's guests at the dance. Sitting in a special section on the balcony, we looked down as he moved among the city officials and their wives, shaking hands, enduring slaps on the back, the embraces of beautiful women. I glanced occasionally at Nicole as she gazed, wide-eyed and wistful, at the ladies in their fancy gowns, glittery sequins catching the lights from a crystal ball revolving on the ceiling. "Isn't that beautiful?" Nicole said, pointing to a woman in a simple white gown that clung to her body like whipped cream. "I'll buy you one like that someday," I whispered in her ear, my voice trembling a bit, betraying my love for her. Squeezing my hand, she leaned toward me, and her warm cheek rested against mine. Finally, Larry LaSalle looked up and motioned towards the front of the hall, meaning he wanted us to join him there. He met us at the entrance, the music muted in the background, and announced, "A surprise awaits!" With a flourish, he led us outside and down the City Hall steps. He lined us up, and we began a wild snake dance through Monument Square. Among the statues of generals and the Civil War cannon, and by the water fountain. Larry LaSalle headed the line. Nicole was next, with her hands on his hips and mine on hers. We laughed and yelled and stopped at the fountain to drink and splash our faces, then crossed the intersection of Main and West and began to march down Mechanic Street, breaking ranks occasionally to pause and laugh as if we were all drunk without having taken a sip of liquor. Once Nicole whispered, "Stay close to me," as we resumed our parade in the shadowed streets, and a thrill went through me like a jolt as I pulled her close and said, "I'll never leave you," as if we were living a love scene at the Plymouth. Finally, the big surprise was at hand as Larry led us along 3rd Street until we stood in front of the rec centre. He bowed to us, producing a key from his pocket, unlocked the door and swung it open. "Voila," he said, ushering us inside, and then told us he'd arranged for Henri Roussier, the old retired janitor, to sweep and clean up the centre for a special night. When Larry turned on the lights, we saw the ping-pong table, rackets and white balls on it, a table with cans of soda pop and candy bars, not chocolate bars anymore because of wartime restrictions, but candy all the same. Larry placed a record on the phonograph, and the hall was filled with an old song from the bright and exciting days of the rec centre before the war, in the time of table tennis tournaments and Follies and Fancies musicals. "Never in a million years will there be another you." Whoa! Got through a lot at the start there. Goodness me. It's perfect, isn't it? Their hero, comes back. He's opened a rec centre for a special evening. Set it all up so they can do all the old things. It's wonderful. Going through the town at night. It's fantastic. Perfect. Seems great, doesn't it? There have been some sneaky little hints of things in what we've read already, which I'll come back to today. But I want to go through it first. We played table tennis without keeping score, hitting the ball back and forth, trying for and sometimes making impossible shots. Larry rolling up the sleeves of his shirt, removing the medals and ribbons that he called scrambled eggs. We played game after game while Nicole changed the records and jitterbugged with Marie Lacroix. The evening wore down, and Joey LeBlanc and Louis Arabelle said goodnight, and later Marie and the others wandered off until finally there were only Larry, and Nicole, and me. He embraced us both. "My favourite champion and my favourite dancer," he said. "Find dancing in the dark," he told Nicole. As she went off to search among the records, Larry placed his arm around my shoulder. "Time to go home, Francis," he said. "You look tired. It's been a long day." The day'd not been long enough for me. "I don't mind staying," I said. "Nicole and I are going to have one last dance," he said. "Just her and me alone. It's important, Francis." I wondered if he had a big announcement for her. That he'd found a way to make her a star. Entertaining the troops, maybe. Nothing was impossible with Larry LaSalle. His face was flushed and his eyes shone with excitement. "So, you better go, okay?" Nicole placed the record on the spindle and turned towards us, an expectant look on her face, glancing at Larry. "I've got to go," I told her. "You and Larry stay. One last dance." The words sounded false as I said them, and I realised they were Larry's words, not mine. Nicole frowned. "Stay and watch," she said, and I was puzzled by the expression on her face. Was she only being polite, asking me to stay? Did she want to be alone with Larry? He went to her, placing his arm around her, drawing her to him gently. "He's tired," Larry said. "He wants to go." We always did what Larry LaSalle told us to do, always carried out his slightest wish, and now I seemed actually to be tired, as Larry had suggested. The events of the day and all the excitement catching up to me. I saw Larry raising his eyebrows at me, the way he looked at me when I made a stupid move at table tennis. Get going. "I'd better go," I said, keeping my eyes away from Nicole, a pang of regret gnawing at me, even as I spoke, because I really wanted to stay, wanted to be a part of them. So he's going to go. What did she say to him when they were dancing through the town? "Stay close to me." And he said, "I'll never leave you." Here he is, going. As I turned away, I heard the plop the record made dropping onto the turntable, a patter of feet. Then a hand touched my shoulder. "Don't go," Nicole whispered into my ear. But Larry LaSalle had told me to go. "No, I'd better leave," I said. "I think he wants to tell you something." The first notes of Dancing in the Dark filled the air, and the singer sang Dancing in the Dark till the tune ends. Suddenly he was there, sweeping her into his arms, and as he did so, he reached out and flicked the switch, plunging the hall into darkness. I made my way towards the front door, but drew back. Didn't leave. Stationed myself in the small foyer, in the slant of moonlight. As the music filled the place, miserable in my aloneness, wanting to be dancing with her, the way Larry LaSalle was dancing with her, holding her close. In the shadows of the hallway, I stood in agony and waited for the song to end, and then I would tell Nicole that I'd not left, that I'd stayed, would never desert her, that she told me not to go and I hadn't, that she was more important to me than Larry LaSalle. The song ended and the scratching of the needle on the record didn't stop, and I heard a sigh and a sound that could have been a moan and a rustle of clothing. How long did I stand there listening? Hearing the small sounds, then a sudden gasp and the needle scratching as the record went round and round, and I couldn't breathe, my body rigid, my lungs burning, and at the point of panic, heart thudding, my breath returned and I listened and heard nothing new. What were they doing? But I knew what they were doing. The thought streaked through my mind so fast that it could hardly be acknowledged. Then, a whimpering, like a small animal caught and trapped, moaning distinct now. The scratching of the record stopped. Footsteps approached, coming closer, and suddenly she stumbled into the hallway, her face caught in the slash of moonlight. She saw me the moment I saw her. Saw her face, her eyes, her hair dishevelled, mouth flung open, lips swollen, cheeks moist with tears, her white blouse torn and one hand clutching the front of her blouse to hold it together. I drew out of the darkness towards her and she raised a hand to stop me, gasping now, her breath like a moan escaping her body. In the spill of moonlight, her eyes flashed black with anger as she looked at me. More than anger. But what? What? I brought my hand up to my face, not to brush away my own tears, but to hide from her terrible gaze. But I couldn't cover my eyes, had to look at her, and I recognised in her eyes now what I could not deny. Betrayal. My betrayal of her in her eyes. For another long moment she stared at me, mouth still agape, then shook her head as if in disbelief and fled toward the door, fumbling with the doorknob. She pulled the door open, stepped through, slamming the door behind her while I stood there helplessly. Numb, I stepped out of the moonlight rays, wanting to hide in the dark. Larry's voice called from inside the hall. "Anybody there?" I stood hushed, pressed to the wall, heard my own breathing so harsh that I was afraid he could hear it. His footsteps grew louder as he approached. He passed through the flash of moonlight, a ghostly silhouette, and I closed my eyes, not wanting to see him. Then no footsteps. Had he seen me? My eyes flew open. He was at the door, a shadow now, turning the knob, whistling a tune, dancing in the dark, whistling softly as he stepped through the doorway, closing the door gently behind him, and went off into the night. I stood there, thinking of what I'd seen in Nicole's eyes. It's amazing that the heart makes no noise when it cracks. So that's a horrible, horrible chapter. And there we are. That is why Francis wants to kill Larry. Because they go to the rec centre, when there's the three of them there, he gets Francis to leave, although Francis doesn't completely leave. He waits in the entrance sort of vestibule. Imagine, if you will, like the reception area before you get into the school. The actual glass surrounded bit where you have to zap to get in. And he waits hidden there in the darkness, and Larry rapes Nicole. And Nicole sees him, doesn't she? There's a lot of symbolism in that very sort of cinematically described scene when he sees her and she sees him. And her white blouse, remember I talked before about her white blouse is like a sign of purity. It's ripped now, because Larry has ripped it. Now, Sophie, good point here. And nice a model of Mark Lamar earlier, by the way. Excellent work. When he met her, Nicole had mischief in her eyes. Now, yes, he just jumped me on to the next part. Nice one. If we think first about when Larry came back off the train, there's something, the way things are described, yeah. Yes, and now there's betrayal in her eyes. Yes, excellent. Larry steps off the train, and he is the same but different. He says he's got that sharpness. He says that he still had Fred Astaire in his walk, but something was different about him. His slenderness was knife-like now, lethal. His features sharp and nose and cheekbones. I couldn't imagine. It's hard to imagine him being a soldier, but now you could imagine him pumping bullets into the enemy. He's now feels dangerous somehow, and that's foreshadowing what will happen with him and Nicole. And yes, Nicole. Well, did you know? I'm sure you did notice. That was what I was saying about hints. When Nicole sees him, his eyes. Okay, let's just imagine this. This bloke is an adult. She is a child. 15, something like that. Yeah. So sorry to get unpleasant, but let's just think about how appropriate this is. His eyes moved to Nicole. That's Larry. And I saw the rush of affection on his face. The rush of affection on his face. That's more than just, oh, that kid's a nice kid that I teach or help. Yeah, that's something a lot more, isn't it? I lost it now. Well done, me. Nicole bowed, tilting her head like a ballet dancer, and he dipped his head in return, his eyes full of her. There's a lot of eye symbolism, as you just pointed out, about Nicole having mischief in her eyes at first and now betrayal in her eyes, and there you have his eyes are full of it. Oh God, that's sick, isn't it? That's not normal. Now, we talk about mischief. Nicole notices, doesn't she? A blush turned her cheeks crimson, and Francis sees it naively, only added to her beauty. But Francis has seen a lot of this stuff, hasn't he? And previously, them dancing together and their bodies close, their lips close, and he feels a pang of jealousy. But that is so inappropriate in itself, isn't it? What was happening before, and now this, and that suspicion I said about mischief in her eyes. She sees that something wrong there. She blushes. She notices the way he's looking at her, and she's not comfortable with it because she's more worldly than Francis, isn't she? She's a bit more aware of what goes on, if you will. And so she said, it's after that she says, stay with me. So maybe that's referring to it. But certainly she begs him not to leave twice. And he doesn't. Well, he doesn't stay. He sort of stays, but not visibly staying so that Larry can't do anything. Of course, he's naive and doesn't realise. But, it's horrible. Religious symbolism, perhaps. Francis denies Nicole 3 times. Like Peter denies Christ 3 times when he's waiting for crucifixion. 3 times he's asked, are you with that guy? And says, oh, no, because he knows he'll be in trouble. Oh, it's horrible, isn't it? The irony when Larry LaSalle makes his speech at the railway station when he says, "We have to keep the world safe for these young people. They are our future." And then that night, he will destroy 2 of their lives. Wow. There's a big... Were this a lesson, I would now be having a huge debate with the class about Francis's actions, and I accept it's not quite the same when we're doing it like this. I think you can guess how Francis is going to feel now this has happened and he failed to stop it. Yeah. He feel terrible shame, surely. If I hadn't done that, if I'd stayed, if I'd listened to her, this wouldn't have happened, so he's going to feel mortified. He is... I don't know. I do feel sorry for him myself, insofar as he is a bit naive, and Larry is his hero. Larry is his authority figure as well. If you massively respect somebody and they tell you should do it, you're probably going to do it. If Francis was inventing ideas in his head, or maybe he's got her a job entertaining the troops, he's inventing all these ideas, so he's trying to justify it in his head, because he thinks, well, Larry, okay, firstly, he wouldn't let me down, he's my hero. Remember all the stuff about the symbolism, what is a real hero? We can talk about that a bit more fully now, can't we? But also because he trusts him. He's always been fantastic, so why would he change now? Oh, and I do understand the authority thing as well. School works on the basis that if a teacher tells you to do something, they have authority, and you've got to do it. So it's a similar thing to that as well, isn't it? Yeah, I might tell you to do your homework. You might not want to, but you're gonna have to do it. So, oh dear, it's horrible, isn't it? It's a really horrible situation, and we can start to explore a bit more. I don't want to spoil anything, but this idea of heroes now. So you have Larry, who appears to be a hero, who I would argue genuinely is a hero in terms of what he did in the war, and also in terms of what he has meant to the kids. But he can do something like that. So he's not a hero then. Or then Francis, who doesn't appear to be a hero, and his damaged face doesn't fit the image that Larry LaSalle fulfills. But anyway, even the heroism of winning the table tennis, he knows, was given to him by Larry. Okay, I'll read a little bit more. I'll finish this glass first. I'm operating, by the way, hydration fans, a 2-glass system. Be prepared. I had an operation on my throat years ago, and I have to keep drinking liquids in lessons. And that time when I had to run off to get a drink, my voice was about to burst because I have to keep drinking. Non-alcoholically, otherwise my throat will pack up. Yum. Okay, do a little bit more. A heat wave gripped Frenchtown, the heat almost visible in the air. People moved as if in a slow-motion movie, gathering on front lawns and piazzas in the evening after the shops closed, hoping for a breeze to cool them off. Men walked slowly as they went off to work in the shops, as weary-looking in the morning as they were late in the day after their shifts were over. For 3 days, I haunted 6th Street at all hours, standing across the street and looking up at the second floor of Nicole's house, venturing sometimes into the yard, hoping I might catch a glimpse of her coming or going at the window. Despite the heat, the piazza on Nicole's second-floor tenement remained vacant. The windows were open to allow cooler air to enter the tenement, but no one came or left. Nicole's father left the tenement to go to the shop just before 7 o'clock in the morning, and returned shortly after 5 in the afternoon, and I avoided him, kept away from the street during those times. A small boy in a house across the street from Nicole's rode his bicycle endlessly on the sidewalk and gazed at me occasionally as I waited. Finally, squinting against the sun, he asked, "Why are you here all the time?" I shrugged, waiting. "Are you the boogeyman?" he asked, scratching his chin. Yes, I wanted to say. The kind of boogeyman who does terrible things, like letting his girl get hurt and attacked, purposely avoiding even in my mind that terrible word, what had actually happened to her. The boy waited a moment for my reply, then pedalled back into his yard, silent as he gazed at me over his shoulder. He went into the house and didn't come out again. Reminds me a little bit of the encounter with the kid in London, where he forgets the effect his face has, when he sees the girl in the window when he goes back for the first time after the war to the tenements and says, like a ghost of Nicole. People, little kids seeing him, being horrified by him when his face is damaged. But this time, he's not. His face isn't damaged, but still the kid says, "Are you a monster? Are you the boogeyman?" In Laurier's drugstore, rumours were rampant about Larry LaSalle's sudden departure from Frenchtown so soon after his arrival. Some said his furlough had been cancelled, that his outfit had been recalled to duty for a big push in Europe against the Nazis. There was talk of a Western Union messenger bicycling down Mechanic Street in the middle of the night, bringing a telegram to the tenement Larry LaSalle rented on Spruce Street. That wasn't a messenger, Mr. Laurier scoffed. That was Crazy Joe Turan, trying to cool off from the heat of the day. I couldn't sleep at night. Lay on the bed and stared up at the ceiling, glad for the heat that was so relentless, as if it was part of the hell that I had earned. So Larry's disappeared. Surprise, surprise. I forgot to say there is one, a horrible little detail. After the rape, Francis is hiding, Nicole leaves, and then Francis is still hiding, and Larry leaves. And Larry is whistling casually that tune that they danced to, Dancing in the Dark. Oh my God, isn't that horrible? It's just nothing to him. It's just, oh, good, it isn't. He's a predatory paedophile. So it's nothing to him, is it? Hey, that was great. It's casually whistling after what he's done. Like, that was good, that was nice. That's a horrible little detail, showing him to be a monster, isn't it? I'll read one more section, and then we'll pack it in. Finally, on the fourth day, I saw her emerging from the hallway to the piazza on the first floor. She didn't move away as I came into the yard. "Nicole!" I called. She saw me, frowned, drew back a step, then paused as if waiting for me to approach. "Nicole!" My voice breaking, not like the days of my shyness with her, but because my heart was so full it destroyed her name as I spoke it. Her eyes met mine. She didn't say anything for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was harsh. "You were there all the time," she said. I couldn't reply, could find no words to utter in my defence, because I had no defence. "You didn't do anything." The accusation in her voice was worse than the harshness. "I know." I wasn't sure whether I spoke those words or only thought them. "You knew what he was doing, didn't you?" My head so heavy, pounding with blood that I could barely nod in agreement. Leaning against the banister, she asked, "Why didn't you do something? Tell him to stop, run for help, anything." "I'm sorry," I said, knowing how pitiful those words must sound to her. She shook her head, turning away, and I couldn't afford to let her go. "Are you?" I began to ask, but hesitated as she turned back and looked at me again. What word could I use? "Are you hurt? Torn apart?" "Are you all right?" I asked. "No, I'm not all right," she answered, anger flashing in her eyes. I hurt all over." I could only stand there, mute, as if all my sins had been revealed and there was no forgiveness for them. Finally I asked, "What can I do?" "Poor Francis," she said at last, but no pity in her voice. Contempt, maybe, as her eyes swept me. She flung her hand in the air, a gesture of dismissal. "Go away, Francis," she said. "Just go away." She herself went away, pulled away from the banister, stepped into the hallway, one moment there, the next moment gone. I waited for her to appear again. I waited through long, empty minutes. Somewhere a door slammed. Later, a dog barked. A car roared by. I finally went away. I won't read this little section, actually, when I think about it. It'll be quick. Later that week, I went to church after supper and slipped into Father Balthazar's confessional, waiting there until Mr. Boudreau, the janitor, closed the doors for the night. Finally, I stepped out into the old smell of burning wax and incense and walked through the shadows to the back of the church. I climbed the stairs to the choir loft and opened the door that led to the exterior of the tallest steeple. Father Balthazar had shown me the door during my altar boy days. I started climbing in the darkness up the steep steps that workers climbed to repair portions of the steeple. The heat intensified and the stairs narrowed as I ascended, my heart beating heavily, my breath coming in gasps, the sounds like cloth ripping. Pausing to gather strength and wait for my heart and lungs to calm down a bit, I looked for the stone door that could be swiveled aside to allow access to the outer surface of the steeple. My fingers found it. Grunting, gasping, I managed to move it aside on its rusty hinges. I looked out at Frenchtown below me. The dark shapes of the three-deckers, the shadowed streets, the stars closer than I'd ever seen them, as if I could reach out and pluck one of them from the sky. Despite the calmness of the summer night, a gust of wind caught me by surprise, cooling the perspiration on my face and forehead. I rested there, bathing in the sudden coolness. Then peered out again, craning my neck to look down at the cement sidewalk below. How long would it take to plunge toward the sidewalk? Still staring down, I began to mumble a prayer in French, the old Notre Père, the way the nuns had taught us, then stopped, horrified at what I was doing. Saying a prayer before committing the worst sin of all, despair. I thought of St. Jude's cemetery and the pitiful graves set apart from the rest, the ones who'd taken their own lives and could not be buried in consecrated ground. I thought of my mother and father. Could I disgrace their name in this way? Did you hear what Lefty's son did last night? Jumped to his death from the steeple of St. Jude's? I could not die that way. Soldiers were dying with honour on battlefields all over the world. Noble deaths, the deaths of heroes. How could I die by leaping from a steeple? The next afternoon I boarded the bus to Fort Delta. In my pocket the birth certificate I'd altered to change my age and became a soldier in the United States Army. Have you noticed that since the rape that there's a lot of religious language? I mean, it ends him going to the church to kill himself. But he talked earlier about it being like a hell because it's so hard. He talked about his sins, his sin coming back to him. Goes for forgiveness to Nicole. Then he goes into the confessional to hide. And ultimately, he doesn't jump. And he says it's partly because he doesn't want to shame his family. His parents are both dead, and now he would kill himself, and that'd be seen as shameful. It's sad, isn't it, how society viewed things like that. Like he said then, part of the cemetery was unconsecrated, so it's not blessed ground, if you like. So there'll be a part of in this case, the cemetery, which is not holy, and suicide victims have to be buried there because they are seen as having sinned by taking their own lives. What a tragic way to look at things. Which is very, very common. In the old days in Britain, it's horrible this, people who killed themselves would be buried under the wall of the cemetery, like sort of half in, half out, because they weren't allowed to fully be in the cemetery. And there's a rather unpleasant piece of politics about consecrated ground in Wrexham Cemetery on Rhubarb Road, because... No, Griffin Road is bigger. No, Rhubarb Road. The cemetery, the cemetery on top of the hill. The bloke who designed it then fell out with the council who commissioned it, and they stabbed him in the back, essentially. Well, not literally. That's not why he's buried there. He wanted to be buried there. They granted his wish, but they buried him in unconsecrated ground, which would have upset him because he was a holy man. So, not nice. Anyway, he doesn't do it, partly because he feels he'd bring that disgrace on his family, and also because he feels shame thinking about how the soldiers are sacrificing themselves, and feels that he should die bravely, if you will. So he joins the army, surely because he doesn't care about living or dying, or maybe wants to die the hero's death instead. So, grim reading today, I think, wasn't it? We'd probably, I'd say another 2 readings of this, we'd probably finish it. I'm definitely going to do Inspector Calls, and I think I've worked out a genius way to do it as well. So I'm going to go off and think about that. Although first, I think I might need to give me beard a trim, because it looks to me like that side's not so bad, but that side looks like some weird sort of 70s disco moustache. So I'll go and do that. I'll leave, as always, the stream up for a while. Thank you all again. And, my streaming thing just disconnected itself. That's weird. Okay, let's see what happened there. Right, so I think I might now be back. 2 encoders might be using the same stream key. Oh, that's probably him. Anyway, I'll go anyway. I'll put it on the post stream for a bit. Let's see if it sustains or not. And stick any comments as usual down there if you wish to. And I'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place. Adios, muchachos.